Time now for Money Power Politics. Markets now just opening with investors hoping to recover losses after the Dow closed nearly 400 points down yesterday. With the growth slowing overall, more attention is being paid to the president's economic policy. The budget deficit, don't fall asleep here, stay with me, it's important, is widening, up 27% from over a year ago. Now, with just 2 months left in the fiscal year, the Treasury Department projecting a deficit of over $1 trillion. That is clearly a sharp increase thanks to the 2-year budget deal that President Trump negotiated with Congress earlier this month. Big spending increases with Trump's tax cuts still in place. Joining us now, former Maryland Congressman and Democratic presidential candidate John Delaney, and my colleague, CNBC anchor Andrew Ross Sorkin. Welcome to you both. Congressman, help us understand this. What do you make 27% increase? When you were a member of Congress, I'm going to guess Republicans would blow a gasket over something like that.
Listen, when I was in Congress, Stephanie, that's all they talked about, which really underscores how fraudulent they've been with the economic conditions of this country. I mean, we all know why this is happening. We had very significant tax cuts that weren't really targeted towards issues that we have to address in the economy. We've had a bunch of spending bills that have increased government spending a lot. We haven't seen the uptick in economic growth that was promised. And we haven't done anything to address the long-term drivers of the deficit, which includes things like health care. So, you know, it's just, I mean, it's ridiculous what's going on. And the fact that the Republicans say nothing about it. I mean, I used to listen to them give speeches every single day about Obama and his deficits. They've gotten much worse under Trump.
Congressman, but here's the great conundrum at this very moment, which is to say the Democratic Party wants higher taxes, absolutely, and we can debate whether the tax cuts were responsible. I would suggest they were irresponsible, but at the same time, there is no conversation being had in the Democratic Party about reducing spending. And so how do you square those two issues?
So the only really spending discussion that we have to have, in my opinion, is health care. Right, because health care, by any measure, is the biggest driver of our long-term spending issues. That's why we have to actually, when we think about health care reform, we not only need to talk about universal access, we need to talk about things that will get costs under control. Because unless we get long-term health care costs under control, it's going to be very hard for us to really get the fiscal trajectory of this country in line. Obviously, those tax cuts didn't do as promised. They were very targeted. It was effectively just a giant corporate tax cut, and that didn't help matters at all. But we're not addressing health care costs, and that's really the number one driver of the long-term fiscal health of this country. We need more revenues, and we need to get health care costs under control.
Then, Andrew, I ask you, take me to the business class voter, because that is your viewer. When they look at the ballooning budget and the tax cuts, which helped corporate America, but what really didn't help anybody else, how do they justify, well, the economy is working for me, I've got to vote for the president? Do they just bank on the argument that the president makes? Well, your option on the other side is a socialist Green New Deal agenda?
I think right now, when you look at the economy, and this is the hardest part to think about, which is in the moment right now, it feels good. But I would contend to you it's a sugar high, and our grandchildren and our children are going to pay for it. That's the fundamental disconnect here. But for the voter who's voting with their wallet in terms of how they feel right this second, when you see unemployment under 4%, it's a very hard argument to go to the public and say, you know what, this economy is not working. We can make the argument about inequality.
The president went to the public and said the economy is not working, and they said, you're damn right it's not working for me, and they voted for him. But I mean the business class voter who didn't vote for him last time, who you think is going to this time.
First of all, I don't know if they're going to this time, but I do think that on the corporate tax side, forgetting about the individual tax cuts, the corporate tax cuts, the CEO community says that was a benefit, A, to the companies and B, to employment. And I don't think they're fundamentally wrong on that. I don't know if I would have gone to the exact rate that where we are. I think it's on the individual side when you talk about inequality where you could have made it up on the other end. I think that's the discussion. Meanwhile, they're looking at some of the Democrats, and I'm not talking about our current guests, but they're looking at some of the Democrats that are talking about the Green New Deal and spending that they would say is out of control and say this is no better than where we are today.
And Congressman, what do you do about that? Next to my house, someone flies a flag that says vote Trump 2020, forget this Democratic socialist BS. How do you manage that in your campaign when you're not somebody who supports Medicare for all and the Green New Deal?
Well, I'm not running on socialism, right? I'm running on real solutions, not these impossible promises. I think what candidates have to do is we have to explain to people how our proposals are going to work, how we're going to pay for them, and how we're going to get them done. And I think if we do that, then your next door neighbor will listen to what we have to say and say, that seems reasonable. Because that's what the American people are looking for. They're very concerned about these deficits when they think about them. The problem is they don't think about them enough because it doesn't get nearly as much coverage as it should. But I want to go back to something Andrew said. I mean, I kind of agree with where he was going with that, because clearly these corporate tax cuts went too far. No one asked for a 21% corporate tax rate. The business community asked for 25%.
There are CEOs like Jamie Dimon who said you didn't have to give us one this big.
No, I mean, look, I thought it should be 27 to 28 and that we should pay for it. The business community lobbied for 25, and then we cut it to 21. As I said, no one even asked for it. But there's been a lot of stimulus in this economy over the last couple of years. I mean, we've increased spending a lot, and we've had these very large corporate tax cuts. And they're starting to run out of steam. And now we've got this trade war going on, which I view is very destabilizing to the global economy. And I just think the president's economic approach, which was based on a lot of stimulus, no good fundamental economic policies, are just going to start unraveling right before our eyes.
But Congressman, I think the larger question, again, going back to if people are voting with their wallets, unless you think the economy turns into a recession, and there are economists who believe that it will, but unless it does, and by the way, whether people will feel that immediately or they'll only see it on the screen because the stock market went down, in which case so many of them are not invested anyway, you know, can you really run on the economy? You might be able to run on inequality. You can run on character. There's lots of things to run on. But do you think that the public is willing to vote on the economic issue given where we are today?
You know, it all depends on their personal circumstances, right? If they feel like they're doing a lot better, it's probably hard. But a lot of the American people don't necessarily feel that way. I mean, if you travel around small towns in this country which are shrinking, you know, their populations are shrinking, they're aging, there's not a lot of jobs. The president hasn't done anything for those communities.
And Andrew, that's what he won on.
But he hasn't done it.
By the way,
but are you actually saying that the economy that the president won on was so bad? There wasn't a
No, I was actually surprised that the American public was, frankly, in my mind, deceived into believing that under President Obama, the economy was somehow terrible. And yet the president was very persuasive, the current president was very persuasive somehow to articulate this message and to convince the public that it was. Now, you tell me whether you think there's a candidate, including the one that's your guest right now, who's able to persuade the public that actually the economy is terrible, which, by the way, I wouldn't say it is terrible.
No, it's not terrible.
And needs to therefore be fixed. And that's the hardest part about this.
Okay, then,
but
Congressman,
the thing is, you know, there's no the problem with this economic discussion, there's no average American anymore, right? You got the average of the top half and the bottom half. When you blend them together, the numbers look pretty good. But if you go to a lot of communities in this country, in fact, most communities, you don't see good economic trends, right? Because we're not building infrastructure. We're not doing the kind of things that will actually create jobs in those communities. The president promised that, you know, he'll bring back all these jobs. He didn't do any of that stuff. So I think we have an opportunity to pound him in these communities, which he basically conned, right? He basically went to them and he said, I'm going to solve all these problems. And he actually hasn't solved any of them in many ways.
All right.
So I think we can go back to those communities and put forth a real agenda where we're building infrastructure, we're creating incentives for people to invest in those communities, and creating jobs in all these places in our country that have been left behind. I mean, last year, 80% of the venture capital went to 50 counties in this country out of 3,000. So clearly we don't have a situation where jobs are getting created in a lot of places in our country, even though the macroeconomic data is pretty good. He's a fraud, and we got to pound him on it.
Well, good luck pounding. Questions about socialism. I don't know. Some might say that the farm aid package, $18 billion, looks like socialism.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.